for what has happened. So he does go with him, but then, though he puts Agag to death, God had commanded, you will utterly destroy the Agagites or the Amalekites. Here comes Agag, and here's the prophet who must now rise above the king to do the work that the king won't do. Um, and so he has to take on the role of the executioner of Agag and kills him, puts him to death. Um, it says here in verse 34, then Samuel went to Ramah, but Saul went up to his house at Gibeah of Saul. And Samuel did not see Saul again until the day of his death, for Samuel grieved over Saul, and the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. Um, this translation, this wording here in verse 35, that Samuel did not see Saul again, we should understand he did not go to see Saul again. We do find out that they do see each other again over in chapter 19. If you look over at chapter 19 and verse 24, there is Saul. He comes looking for David, but ends up at Ramah, and he's looking for Samuel and David, and so he goes into Naioth, and verse 24, so he stripped off his clothes, and he too prophesied before Samuel, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Therefore, they say, is Saul also among the prophets? And so there was a chance encounter of these two men again, Samuel and Saul. But the idea here is that should be conveyed in this verse is that Samuel doesn't seek out Saul again. Their relationship is done. Samuel has come to realize what kind of man Saul is. He's come to realize that for all of his bravado and for all of his outwardly appearance, you know, he looked every inch the king. He looked like a man of valor. He looked like a man that could be a leader, but in reality, he's not. He just, you know, the outward appearance doesn't fit what's inside the man. And Samuel has come to realize that. And Samuel is grieving because of Saul. It says there in verse 35, for Samuel grieved over Saul. Why? Again, Samuel, I think, feels some degree of responsibility for what's happened with Saul. He sees that Saul has refused to listen to God. Saul is willing to blame the people. Saul is not leading the way he needs to be leading. He's not taking charge of the situation the way he needs to take charge. And he grieves over him, I think, as one might grieve over, just as we see brethren sometimes who fall into sin, who get entangled with the cares of the world, and we grieve for those brethren who were worshiping with us, but somehow now wandered off. Samuel has the same feeling for Saul. Here's a man that he had some great hope in, some great expectations for him, and Saul has just kind of let the thing fall. He just kind of let it all down. And so Samuel is grieving for him in the same way that we might, like I said, grieve for some brother that we had great hope for and great expectation for, and we find out really has no interest in godly things. Any comment or question about chapter 15? And otherwise, we'll move into chapter, I think your second point is part of that. I think it's he shows that distancing from what he believed from God. There's also a sense here, at least from what I'm reading here, is that there's a sense that Samuel doesn't see what he did was wrong in the eyes of God. He just thinks it's Samuel. I mean, Saul doesn't see what he did was wrong in the eyes of God. He just thinks Samuel's upset with him. He doesn't see that he's failed God. I didn't, it'd be like if I was doing something wrong and sinful, and John would come to me and say, "Hey, you're doing something that's wrong and ungodly, and you need to stop." And I would be going, "Well, that's just John's opinion." And yeah, John, I'm sorry I offended you or made you upset, but I didn't really do anything wrong. And there is that sense of that kind of an attitude that Saul doesn't see that he's failed God. He sees it only that I failed to do what you think I should do, Samuel. And so there is that thought that perhaps he is asking Samuel for forgiveness. He ought to be entreating God. He ought to be at least asking. You would have thought he would have asked Samuel, for example, to pray God for him and approach God for him. If he really believes that he has offended God, why isn't he approaching God, or why isn't he encouraging Samuel to approach God for him? But instead, like you point out in verse 25, please pardon my sin to Samuel. Well, it isn't Samuel that's offended. Well, Samuel is offended, but it's not just Samuel that's offended. It's God. And Saul doesn't, for whatever reason, can't pick up on that. He just kind of glosses over that. And I think that's what's going on here. I believe that's the indication here, is that we have here a man who really doesn't see that what he did, that he did anything wrong. Even though he was told utterly to destroy the Amalekites, his attitude is, I'm getting there. I'm getting around to it. No, that's not what God wanted. God wanted them destroyed, and he wanted them destroyed now. And, Saul's attitude is, well, we'll get there, but we're going to have a party first, if you will. And no, that's not the way it's going to work. You didn't obey God. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, Ruth makes the point of comparing this to the passage in Matthew 7:21. That many will say unto me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out devils, and in your name do many wonderful works? And God will say, and Jesus will say, depart from me, I never knew you, you workers of iniquity. It's the same kind. I think you've got a point, Ruth. It's that same kind of an attitude. Well, look, I did some good things. Don't I get credit for doing the good things? And no, you don't get credit for doing the good. This isn't a balance sheet. God doesn't run a balance sheet. It's, are you obedient or are you not obedient? And that's the question. Well, yeah, I think you got a point there. It looks like you're right. It looks like in verse 24 he does acknowledge that, okay, I didn't listen to the exact words of God, but then he makes a gloss of it. He makes he wants to just kind of pass over it and pretend like, well, it's not really a big deal. He's trying to make it out to be less than it is, and basically minimize his own culpability. And I think that's what we find here is a man who's, again, more along the lines of, well, I made Samuel angry at me, but I don't see that God's mad at me. There's almost that attitude in it. Yeah, Regina. Yeah. Yeah, you would have thought he would have realized at that point that he had failed in his duty to God, that he had failed to follow the command of God when it's actually Samuel that has to put why didn't, again, we might ask the question, why didn't then, if Saul understands, that's a good point, Regina, because if Saul understands that he's failed God, why doesn't he take immediate action to put Agag to death? Why doesn't he take care of it? Why does he leave it to Saul to do? I mean, to Samuel to do? And that's an excellent question. That's an excellent question, and again, it points out to me the kind of the wishy-washiness of Saul, if I could put it in that term. It's something of a wishy-washy nature. Why didn't Samuel, or Saul rather, step up and say, "You're right. I need to take care of this. I'll take care of it right now," and go ahead with it? And instead, no, now Samuel's got to step up and do the job that should have already been done. That's an excellent point. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. 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 That but is in effect an attempt to negate the the admission of sin. It is saying, well, yes, I sinned, but it really wasn't my fault, or B, it really isn't that big of a sin, or C, uh, yeah, I understand, and it's really no big deal. I mean, it really is. It really is an attempt to negate out what's going on. I think it's a good point. Yeah, Gary. Yeah. Well. Yeah. Yeah. It was just flat out wrong. Yeah, it's a good point. That it's clear here that God, having given Saul this position, is holding him to a higher degree of responsibility. He has the greater responsibility. He is the leader of the nation. He's been given that role of leader of the nation, and because he has that role, he has that higher responsibility. With that power came that responsibility. With that power came that expectation that he was going to be leading the people toward God, and to find out that he's not is uh, causing him to fall into the greater condemnation, I think. And that's a good point. Yes, if in our leadership today, um, uh, we see various activities on the parts of various elected officials, and we're um, we're discouraged by it because we hold those folks, frankly, to a higher expectation, given the fact that they have been selected to be leaders. We hold them to a certain higher expectation than we would for perhaps somebody else. If uh, if I learned that Justin was going out and playing golf every other day, uh, uh, I don't have any concern for that because if Justin wants to play golf and he's got the funds to do it, that's his business, and so long as he keeps to his business, his playing golf is of no consequence to me. But when we have elected leaders who we expect to be taking care of the affairs of state, for example, to be taking care of the security of the nation, and instead they are, in a certain view, too busy playing golf to take care of the concerns of the nation. Then we are rightfully unhappy and rightfully critical of the person in that position. And so there is a certain higher standard that folks in those roles are going to be held to. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. They do. It would have been longer than that, I believe. I would have been thinking considerably longer than that. Yes. Yes. Yeah. There was. It sounds cruel to our ears that they would be killing women and children. That we understand that this is in our time, such a behavior would be a war crime to kill women and children and to, huh? Really? Well, yes. Yeah, that's true. Well, but this was genocidal. Now, genocidal is certainly been held to be a war crime, and so I'll put it that way. This would have been a genocidal order, and would have looked harsh to our eyes, I think. Um, but I think you're right, John. I think you spoke of before. There's a passage, and I don't know where it is right now, but it talks about the that God delayed because the wickedness of the Amalekites was not yet complete. And you've spoken of that passage a number of times. I thought about that as you were talking, Bill, and as I read this, that God, as you pointed out, God gave them time, and even early on noted they were wicked but not yet complete. And there comes a passage when there was that passage when apparently their wickedness became complete. Their time was up, and at that point, it's God has to do. God has decided we're going to do something about this, and He sends Saul to take care of it. And unfortunately, Saul is not up to the task. Genesis 15:16. Yeah, he says, this is the prophecy to Abram that God gives. He says, I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. And as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace, and you shall be buried in a good old age. Then in the fourth generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not complete. That's what he told Abram. And so that would have been centuries before this event. That the Amorites, wicked people, as you pointed out, Bill, very wicked people. But even in Genesis, not yet ready, not yet complete. God still gave them time to change their mind, gave them time to repent, and they wouldn't do it. Okay, we're going to chapter 16 then. And now we have this transition. This is a transitioning now from Saul. We're going to transition to David. And this is the beginning of that beginning of that transition here in these opening verses of chapter 16. It says, "Now the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself among his sons." But Samuel said, "How can I go? When Saul hears of it, he will kill me." And the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. And you shall invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do, and you shall anoint for me the one whom I designate to you." So Samuel did what the Lord said and came to Bethlehem, and the elders of the city came trembling to meet him and said, "Do you come in peace?" And he said, "In peace. I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." He also consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. So Samuel is sent to the house of Jesse. It's interesting to note that Samuel fears for his life. And why? Well, it is apparent that Saul is becoming suspicious of those around him. He is suspicious of Samuel. Samuel has dared to criticize him, as you saw there in chapter 15, dared to criticize him. Therefore, he must be an enemy of Saul. Anyone who criticized Saul was an enemy, and Saul is apparently having him watched, and so he's afraid that if I go down to Bethlehem, that Saul will find out about it and kill me. We can understand that this is suggesting of the paranoia, perhaps, that's running with Saul at this point, that Samuel even fears for his life. And so God decides that this task must be done with secrecy and discretion, and he gives Samuel a separate task as a cover story. And this suggests to me, we're told not to lie, but just because we're told not to lie, we're told, that given that we're told not to lie, that doesn't mean we have to reveal everything we know. And certainly here is Samuel going down to Bethlehem, and he doesn't reveal everything he knows. He's under no compulsion to let Saul know what's going on this. Yeah, Rick? Samuel, yeah. Yes, it's trouble. Yes. Yeah. A surprise visit from Samuel is not necessarily good news. In fact, it's probably not good news. And that's interesting. Yes, that's an interesting observation. That a visit from Samuel is not good news. Now, what's going to happen? Yes. Um, we know something of Jesse's lineage. It's given to us back in the book of Ruth, of course, and we remember this from studying this book at various times. But if we look at the book of Ruth there in chapter 4 and verse 18, now these are the generations of Perez. To Perez was born Hezron, and to Hezron was born Ram, and to Ram Aminadab, and to Aminadab was born Nahshon, and to Nahshon Salmon. And to Salmon was born Boaz, and to Boaz Obed, and to Obed was born Jesse, and to Jesse David. So there is the lineage given in the book of Ruth, and so we understand that David here is the great-grandson of Ruth and Boaz, those two characters from the Old Testament. Samuel then goes on. Read on in verse 6. He came about that when he entered, he looked at Eliab and thought, "This is the firstborn, Eliab. Surely the Lord's anointed is before him." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For God does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel, and he said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one." Next, Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one." Thus Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. But Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen these." And Samuel said to Jesse, "Are these all the children?" And he said, "There remains yet the youngest, and behold, he is tending the sheep." Then Samuel said to Jesse, "Send and bring him, and we will not sit down until he comes here." So he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance. And the Lord said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is he." Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. And Samuel arose and went to Ramah. Again, we find here Samuel is making the same mistake as the people made. They look at the outward appearance. Oh, look, here's a nice, tall, sturdy-looking man. Surely this is the Lord's anointed. Well, God doesn't see the same way. God isn't going to appraise these men in that way. He's looking at what the content of their character is, the quality of their heart. He's not concerned about how tall they are or how strong they look, or do they look like a leader of men. No, I don't care what they look like. I care about what's going on inside them. And so it is God then who's going to make this choice. Yeah. That is true. Yes. We have tended to select our leaders on the basis of their outward character or outward characteristics, and not necessarily on the quality of their character. And we see that happening, as Gary points out, time and again. If we've got candidates that are running, the tall man will win. Um, um, we can point to a number of U.S. elections and see that happening, where the man who was selected to be president was selected on the basis of his outward appearance. If he was a handsome man, if he was tall, if he was virile looking, then he would get the selection as president over his opponent. Some of these scholars look at this. They see Jesse. Here's Jesse seems to have this reluctance to introduce David. They may suggest that he may have held David in low regard. That here's the youngest son, and perhaps Jesse considers David to be something of a waste. I don't know. I don't know exactly the word to use. Apparently Jesse held him in low regard. Regina, you had a comment? Right. Yeah, we should look at the quality of the person to the best extent that we can judge the quality of the person instead of looking at their outward characteristics. That's exactly right. Um, yeah, yeah. David at this point was probably a young teenager. He would have been, maybe some have suggested as young as 14 or thereabouts, 13, 14, 15 maybe years old at this point. And yeah, he would have been a kid. Effectively, he would have been a kid, and maybe some gangly teenager. And yeah, Jesse apparently didn't think much of him, other than, okay, yeah, you can take care of the flock, and we'll put you in charge of that task, um, which was usually reserved for servants. That was usually the role of the servant for a family that had servants. Yeah, yeah, you would have thought so. Oh yeah. Well, he might have been. I don't know. Maybe that's the point. Maybe he was protecting David. Um, I don't know that Jesse. I don't know that Jesse knows that. I don't know. We don't know. At this point, frankly, we don't know what has been divulged to him of Samuel's actual mission, his actual underlying purpose. Um, there is this description of David, and again, you read through some of the commentators, and you get some debate about what this, what the meaning of this is. That this description of his appearance in verse 12, he was ruddy with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance. Um, Several of the commentators suggest this was, he was a redhead. That red hair was unusual in the Israelites, but not unheard of. After all, Esau had been apparently a redhead, and so there is some thought that he's right. David is likewise a redheaded man, um, and so therefore he would have been um, uncommon. He would have been an uncommon appearance, had an uncommon appearance, especially in this society. We see here that the Spirit of the Lord comes upon David, as it says here. The Spirit of the Lord came upon mightily from that day forward. Again, there is some suggestion that just as Saul had received an extraordinary, maybe even supernatural ability to command and control men and command and control a battlefield, that likewise David was given the same gift from God, that he is now endowed with this ability, this extraordinary ability to again command and control men, and to understand exactly what needs to be done in the heat of a battle. And so he has this gift given to him as well. We see, of course, that he anoints him. It says in the midst of his brothers. So his brothers are well aware that he's been anointed, and they have not. And then Samuel goes and immediately leaves, apparently, and goes back to his home city. Yeah. How old was Saul when he was anointed? Best guess would have been maybe in his 20s, somewhere in his 20s, roughly. That's an interesting thought, that David might have been more open to learning. But really, I do think that there is more of the sense there that here in David was a man who was already committed to God, whereas Saul was not. Saul was apparently sort of I guess we would say almost ambivalent about religion. Uh, that yes, he was willing to go with religion, he was willing to go with God, as long as God was going where Saul wanted to go. Um, but the minute that God wanted him to do something that Saul didn't want to do, why that Saul's going to do what he wants, not what God wants, and gets that attitude. Whereas David, we're going to see some characteristics of David here in this chapter a little bit, and especially in the next chapter, we're going to see something of David's zealousness. There is a zealousness in David for God, and that Saul really never demonstrated. You never really see that same degree of commitment to God out of Saul as you see out of David. And it's clear that David has a greater degree of trust in God, a greater degree of of willingness to rely on God than Saul has. Yes, yes, yeah. We're going to get there here in a little over in about a chapter or so. Not today, apparently. Um, Here we have chapter, then in verse 14. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. Now this is that Spirit of the Lord. Again, we had talked about how God had given Saul the Spirit of the Lord. The Spirit of the Lord apparently had something to do with, an extraordinary ability to command and control men, to understand exactly how a battle should go about. That we pointed out, Samuel never lost a fight while the Spirit of the Lord was with him. And then but then after the Spirit of the Lord departs, Saul isn't winning like he was. It says here, the Spirit of the Lord departed, and he says then, and an evil spirit from the Lord terrorized him. And Saul's servant said to him, behold, now an evil spirit from God is terrorizing you. Now, a lot of comment has been made about this. Where did this evil spirit come from? Does God send evil spirits out upon men today? And does God did God direct this evil spirit to go and attack Saul? And I will suggest to you that no, because we learned from James that from the book of James, if you recall, that God does not tempt man with evil, nor does he do evil. That's not God's nature to do evil. But we also know that Satan will attack the godly given any opportunity. We find that over in the book of Job, for example, we're familiar with that from our study of that book earlier. Job chapter 1, verse 8 said, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. Then Satan answered the Lord, does Job fear God for nothing? Hast thou not made a hedge about him and his house and all that he has on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But put forth thy hand now and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse thee to thy face. Then the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not put forth your hand on him. So Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. Then in chapter 2, verse 3, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. And he still holds fast his integrity, though you have incited me against him to ruin him without cause. And Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life. However, put forth thy hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. And so the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your power, only spare his life. And so there we see that example of how Satan was given permission from God to attack Job. We also know from passages in the New Testament, Luke 22, for example, 22, 31, 32, where Jesus reports to Peter, says that Satan has demanded, he says, to sift you like wheat, if you recall that passage. And we might ask ourselves, does Satan likewise want to take us and sift us like wheat? And I would suggest to you that I believe he does. That God is restrained from, God restrains Satan from his attacks, but that if Satan were given the chance, he would like to take each and every one of us who believe in God, each and every one of us who believe in Jesus Christ, and he would like to sift us like wheat. He would like to really put the screws to us, if you will, and just see how well our faith would endure. Peter says there in 1 Peter, the 5th chapter, verses 8 and 9. I think I'm going to try and read that rather than quote it, because I'm not sure I'll do it right. But this is a passage we've seen a number of times. 1 Peter 5, verses 8 and 9. Be sober, of sober spirit, be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls about like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. To resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same experiences of suffering are being accomplished by your brethren who are in the world. And after you have suffered for a little while, the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself perfect, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. And so we understand that, yes, Satan goes around as a roaring lion. Satan would like to have you in his power. I believe he would like to have each and every one of us in his power to do with us as he will. And it is by the grace of God that we are not enduring some of the same trials and situations that that befell some of the early Christians and some of the other folks we find mentioned in the Bible. All right, I'm going to stop there. We'll continue on with this. We'll pick this up again next week and continue from there and try and get into chapter 17. Appreciate your attention this morning. Thank you.